This is the Bible in 1 year, day 14. Just relax and let God be God. Joyce Meyer tweeted, just relax and let God be God. It's a great comfort to know that a loving God is ultimately in control of everything that happens. Bishop Sandy Miller often says, in the face of some tragedy or when things have gone badly wrong, the Lord reigns. Many times throughout the Bible, God is referred to as the sovereign Lord. Both Joyce Meyer and Sandy Miller are expressing in different ways absolute confidence in the sovereignty of God. If God is sovereign and ultimately in control, does that mean you are absolved of responsibility for your actions? Does it mean that you do not have free will? The Bible teaches both the ultimate sovereignty of God at the same time as human responsibility and free will. From Psalm 9. Confidently trust in the sovereign Lord. God is in ultimate control of the universe. The Lord reigns. God will judge the world in righteousness, rightness, and equity. He will minister justice to the people in uprightness. This knowledge is an enormous comfort. We may never know in this life why God allows some horrendous things to happen. Trust in the sovereignty of God and keep on believing that He will never forsake you. And they who know your name will lean on and confidently put their trust in you. For you, Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you. In the meantime, keep doing these three things. Praising, sing the praises of the Lord. Proclaim among the nations what He has done. Praying. The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. He does not ignore the cry of the afflicted. Lord, thank you that you do not ignore my cries and that I can confidently trust in you. Thank you that I can relax and let you be God. New Testament from Matthew 11. Accept the invitation to walk with Jesus. The teaching of Jesus is fascinating. In the first section of today's passage, he seems to be saying you can't win. On the one hand, John the Baptist was an ascetic and was accused of being demon-possessed. On the other hand, Jesus went to parties with all kinds of people and made friends with those who were regarded as unsavory characters. He was accused of being a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Whatever you do may be misinterpreted, yet Jesus adds, but wisdom is proved right by her actions. I take this to mean that all we can do is the right thing and not worry what anybody else thinks. Opinion polls don't count for much, do they? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. Jesus then denounces the cities that he's visited and performed miracles in, where people have neither repented nor believed. He suggests that their sin is worse than the sin of Sodom. The sin of unbelief is perhaps the most serious of all. Jesus goes on to teach in such a way that it's clear that he believed in both predestination, that God has already determined everything that will happen, and free will. He teaches both alongside one another. It's a paradox. The two seemingly contradictory things are both true at the same time. It's not 50% predestination, 50% free will. Jesus says we're 100% predestined and we have 100% free will. This may seem impossible, but God is able to transcend and not distort human freedom. We ultimately see this in the incarnation. Jesus is 100% God and 100% human. He is fully God and fully human. Predestination. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Why God chooses to reveal himself to some and not to others is a mystery, certainly not based on wisdom and learning. Sometimes the great intellectuals simply cannot see it. You've hidden these things from the wise and learned, and yet sometimes people of little or no education, or those who are very young, little children, seem to have a very profound understanding of Jesus. You've concealed your way from sophisticates and know-it-alls and spelled them out clearly to ordinary people. Free will. Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The invitation to come to Jesus is for everyone. No one is excluded. We are all invited. We all have a choice whether to accept the invitation of Jesus or to refuse it. I find it difficult to get my mind around this paradox. However, I found the following illustration helpful. Imagine a room with an arched doorway. The outside of the arch is inscribed with the words, Come to me, all you. Everyone is invited into the room. But when you get into the room, on the inside of the same arch is written, no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. In other words, free will is a doctrine for everyone. No one can say, I'm not going to become a Christian because I've not been chosen. The invitation is to all. On the other hand, predestination is a doctrine of assurance for those who are Christians. Once you've accepted the invitation and entered, you can know that God has chosen you, and therefore he will not let you go. I love the fact that in a stressful world, where so many are weary and burdened, Jesus promises you rest. He offers to take your burdens and place them with his own. The yoke, something that Jesus would have made in the carpenter's shop, was a wooden frame joining two animals, usually oxen, at the neck, enabling them to pull a plough or wagon together. The function of the yoke is to make burdens easier to carry. I love the image of walking in step with Jesus, sharing our burdens, making the trials to be endured and the battles to be faced easy and light by comparison. Jesus is not a slave driver. When you pursue his agenda for your life, you carry a burden, but it's not harsh, hard, sharp or pressing, but comfortable, gracious and pleasant. When you do what Jesus asks you to do, he gives you the strength and wisdom to do it, and you carry his burden with him. There will, of course, be many challenges and difficulties, but there will also be a lightness and ease. Jesus says to you, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Just relax and let God be God. Lord, thank you that you promised me rest for my soul. I come to you today. I give to you my burdens. Old Testament from Genesis 29:30. Watch God work his purposes out. God works his purposes out in spite of our weakness, vulnerability, and sin. Jacob was a deceiver. What we sow, we reap. He sowed deception and he reaped deception from Laban. He then continued the cycle of deception. This is an extraordinary story of deception, unfaithfulness, and disloyalty. Yet somehow, in all of this, God worked his purposes out for the individuals involved, for Israel, for the birth of his son, Jesus, and for the future of the people of God. A lot of human sin and disappointment was involved in the birth of Jacob's children. Yet through it all, God was working out his purposes for the 12 tribes of Israel. Rachel's prayer was finally answered with the birth of Joseph. As God was in control of their lives, you can trust that he is ultimately in control of yours as well, and that in all things God works for the good for those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. So just relax and let God be God. Lord, thank you that you use even weak, vulnerable, and sinful people like me. Thank you that although you love me as I am, you love me too much to leave me as I am. Help me to take responsibility for my life and at the same time confidently trust in your sovereignty.
Pippa adds, I'm really enjoying reading Genesis 29 and 30. The story is much better than watching the latest Netflix drama. What will they do next? It's interesting that Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel all had difficulty having children. This is not a new problem. When the children eventually arrived, they were very important to God's plan for the people of Israel. Was God waiting for the right time, or was he preparing the parents in some way? Most of Jacob's children seem to have been born as a result of sibling rivalry and jealousy. Yet God didn't give up on them, and he still managed to work out his purposes for each of their lives.
But the Lord reigns forever, executing judgment from his throne. He will judge the world with justice and rule the nations with fairness. The Lord is a shelter for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. Those who know your name trust in you. For you, O Lord, do not abandon those who search for you. Sing praises to the Lord who reigns in Jerusalem. Tell the world about his unforgettable deeds. For he who avenges murder cares for the helpless. He does not ignore the cries of those who suffer.
To what can I compare this generation? It is like children playing a game in the public square. They complain to their friends, "We played wedding songs, and you didn't dance. So we played funeral songs, and you didn't mourn. For John didn't spend his time eating and drinking, and you say he's possessed by a demon. The Son of Man, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard, and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners." But wisdom is shown to be right by its results. Then Jesus began to denounce the towns where he had done so many of his miracles, because they hadn't repented of their sins and turned to God. "What sorrow awaits you, Chorazin and Bethsaida! For if the miracles I did in you had been done in wicked Tyre and Sidon, their people would have repented of their sins long ago, clothing themselves in burlap and throwing ashes on their heads to show their remorse. I tell you, Tyre and Sidon will be better off on Judgment Day than you. And you people of Capernaum, will you be honored in heaven? No, you will go down to the place of the dead. For if the miracles I did for you had been done in wicked Sodom, it would still be here today. I tell you, even Sodom will be better off on Judgment Day than you." At that time, Jesus prayed this prayer: "O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, thank you for hiding these things from those who think themselves wise and clever, and for revealing them to the childlike. Yes, Father, it pleased you to do it this way. My Father has entrusted everything to me. No one truly knows the Son except the Father, and no one truly knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." Then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light."
Chapter 29. Then Jacob hurried on, finally arriving in the land of the east. He saw a well in the distance. 3 flocks of sheep and goats lay in an open field beside it, waiting to be watered. But a heavy stone covered the mouth of the well. It was the custom there to wait for all the flocks to arrive before removing the stone and watering the animals. Afterward, the stone would be placed back over the mouth of the well. Jacob went over to the shepherds and asked, "Where are you from, my friends?" "We are from Haran," they answered. "Do you know a man there named Laban, the grandson of Nahor?" he asked. "Yes, we do," they replied. "Is he doing well?" Jacob asked. "Yes, he's well," they answered. "Look, here comes his daughter Rachel with the flock now." Jacob said, "Look, it's still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals. Why don't you water the sheep and goats so they can get back out to pasture?" "We can't water the animals until all the flocks have arrived," they replied. Then the shepherds moved the stone from the mouth of the well, and we water all the sheep and goats. Jacob was still talking with them when Rachel arrived with her father's flock, for she was a shepherd. And because Rachel was his cousin, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and because the sheep and goats belonged to his uncle Laban, Jacob went over to the well and moved the stone from its mouth and watered his uncle's flock. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, and he wept aloud. He explained to Rachel that he was her cousin on her father's side, the son of her aunt Rebekah. So Rachel quickly ran and told her father Laban. As soon as Laban heard that his nephew Jacob had arrived, he ran out to meet him. He embraced and kissed him and brought him home. When Jacob had told him his story, Laban exclaimed, You really are my own flesh and blood." After Jacob had stayed with Laban for about a month, Laban said to him, "You shouldn't work for me without pay just because we are relatives. Tell me how much your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter was named Leah, and the younger one was Rachel. There was no sparkle in Leah's eyes, but Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. Since Jacob was in love with Rachel, he told her father, "I'll work for you for 7 years if you'll give me Rachel, your younger daughter, as my wife." "Agreed," Laban replied. "I'd rather give her to you than to anyone else. Stay and work with me." So Jacob worked 7 years to pay for Rachel. But his love for her was so strong that it seemed to him but a few days. Finally, the time came for him to marry her. "I have fulfilled my agreement," Jacob said to Laban. "Now give me my wife so I can sleep with her." So Laban invited everyone in the neighborhood and prepared a wedding feast. But that night, when it was dark, Laban took Leah to Jacob, and he slept with her. Laban had given Leah a servant Zilpah to be her maid. But when Jacob woke up in the morning, it was Leah. "What have you done to me?" Jacob raged at Laban. "I worked 7 years for Rachel. Why have you tricked me?" "It's not our custom here to marry off a younger daughter ahead of the firstborn," Laban replied. "But wait until the bridal week is over. Then we'll give you Rachel too, provided you promise to work another 7 years for me." So Jacob agreed to work 7 more years. A week after Jacob had married Leah, Laban gave him Rachel too. Laban gave Rachel a servant, Bilhah, to be her maid. So Jacob slept with Rachel too, and he loved her much more than Leah. He then stayed and worked for Laban the additional 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he enabled her to have children, but Rachel could not conceive. So Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has noticed my misery, and now my husband will love me." She soon became pregnant again and gave birth to another son. She named him Simeon, for she said, "The Lord heard that I was unloved and has given me another son." Then she became pregnant a 3rd time and gave birth to another son. He was named Levi, for she said, "Surely this time my husband will feel affection for me since I have given him 3 sons." Once again, Leah became pregnant and gave birth to another son. She named him Judah, for she said, "Now I will praise the Lord." And then she stopped having children. Chapter 30. When Rachel saw that she wasn't having any children for Jacob, she became jealous of her sister. She pleaded with Jacob, "Give me children, or I'll die." Then Jacob became furious with Rachel. "Am I God?" he asked. "He's the one who has kept you from having children." Then Rachel told him, "Take my maid Bilhah and sleep with her. She will bear children for me, and through her I can have a family too." So Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife, and he slept with her. Bilhah became pregnant and presented him with a son. Rachel named him Dan, for she said, "God has vindicated me. He has heard my request and given me a son." Then Bilhah became pregnant again and gave Jacob a 2nd son. Rachel named him Naphtali, for she said, "I have struggled hard with my sister, and I'm winning." Meanwhile, Leah realized that she wasn't getting pregnant anymore, so she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Soon Zilpah presented him with a son. Leah named him Gad, for she said, "How fortunate I am." Then Zilpah gave Jacob a 2nd son, and Leah named him Asher, for she said, "What joy is mine! Now the other women will celebrate with me." One day during the wheat harvest, Reuben found some mandrakes growing in a field and brought them to his mother Leah. Rachel begged Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But Leah angrily replied, "Wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Now will you steal my son's mandrakes too?" Rachel answered, "I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of the mandrakes." So that evening, as Jacob was coming home from the fields, Leah went out to meet him. "You must come and sleep with me tonight," she said. "I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found." So that night he slept with Leah, and God answered Leah's prayers. She became pregnant again and gave birth to a 5th son for Jacob. She named him Issachar, For she said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband as a wife. Then Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to a sixth son for Jacob. She named him Zebulun, for she said, God has given me a good reward. Now my husband will treat me with respect, for I have given him 6 sons. Later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. God has removed my disgrace, she said. And she named him Joseph, for she said, May the Lord add yet another son to my family. Soon after Rachel had given birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, Please release me so I can go home to my own country. Let me take my wives and children, for I have earned them by serving you, and let me be on my way. You certainly know how hard I have worked for you. Please listen to me, Laban replied. I have become wealthy, for the Lord has blessed me because of you. Tell me how much I owe you. Whatever it is, I'll pay it. Jacob replied, You know how hard I've worked for you, and how your flocks and herds have grown under my care. You had little indeed before I came, but your wealth has increased enormously. The Lord has blessed you through everything I've done, but now, what about me? When can I start providing for my own family? What wages do you want? Laban asked again. Jacob replied, Don't give me anything. Just do this one thing, and I'll continue to tend and watch over your flocks. Let me inspect your flocks today, and remove all the sheep and goats that are speckled or spotted, along with all the black sheep. Give these to me as my wages. In the future, when you check on the animals you have given me as my wages, you'll see that I have been honest. If you find in my flock any goats without speckles or spots, or any sheep that are not black, you will know that I have stolen them from you. All right, Laban replied. It will be as you say. But that very day Laban went out and removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, or had white patches, and all the black sheep. He placed them in the care of his own sons, who took them a 3 days' journey from where Jacob was. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took some fresh branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and peeled off strips of bark, making white streaks on them. Then he placed these peeled branches in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, for that was where they mated. And when they mated in front of the white streaked branches, they gave birth to young that were streaked, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated those lambs from Laban's flock, and at mating time he turned the flock to face Laban's animals that were streaked or black. This is how he built his own flock instead of increasing Laban's. Whenever the stronger females were ready to mate, Jacob would place the peeled branches in the watering troughs in front of them. Then they would mate in front of the branches. But he didn't do this with the weaker ones. So the weaker lambs belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones were Jacob's. As a result, Jacob became very wealthy, with large flocks of sheep and goats, female and male servants, and many camels and donkeys.